all, and just grateful for everyone here. I came across this book. I went to the thrift store yesterday, and you find pretty good books there. And I found this John O'Donohue book that I'd been hearing about for a little while, and then I thought, okay, now I found it there, and it's $5. I'll go for it. And it turns out it has all these kind of beautiful poetic prayers and benedictions and openings. And I found this poem called A Morning Offering. I thought, well, that would be an appropriate reading here for this morning. So, John O'Donohue, A Morning Offering, he writes, I bless the night that nourished my heart, to set the ghosts of longing free into the flow and figure of dream that went to harvest from the dark, bread for the hunger no one sees. All that is eternal in me welcomes the wonder of this day. I love that challenge. All that is eternal in me welcomes the wonder of this day. The fields of brightness it creates, offering time for each thing to arise and illuminate. I place on the altar of dawn the quiet loyalty of breath, the tent of thought where I shelter, waves of desire I am shore to, and all beauty drawn to the eye. May my mind come alive today to the invisible geography that invites me to new frontiers, to break the dead shell of yesterdays, to risk being disturbed and changed. May I have the courage today to live the life that I would love, to postpone my dream no longer, but do at last what I came here for, and waste my heart on fear no more. I like that. To waste my heart no more on fear. Friends, let's take a moment to center in the silence, and I will share a brief word or two. Loving Creator, we feel your embrace in the silence as well as in the embrace of friendship and fellowship that we have encountered here today. Already it is a cup of cool water to our spirits. Loving God, we want to make space for our soul today. We have made space for industry all week. We have made space for work, for doing, for laziness, for play. We've made space for all of that, but now we want to make space for the soul, that we may listen to the soul and hear your still small voice. So we welcome you first in our hearts. We welcome you then in one another, for we see that of God in each person we encounter. We bless you. We welcome you. We thank you. Amen.
Matthew 7, 1 and 2. Do not judge, so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure you give will be the measure you get. John 8:7. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and he said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone."
Thank you, Carolyn, for that reading of Scripture. Thank you, music team, for those songs. I'm going to be humming, and the world is about to turn for the rest of the week. And also, I was assigned the honor to introduce our speaker, who lives in Belfast, and I just realized I'm wearing my 3-leaf clover socks. Is that the subconscious? Margaret, however, before I really do get into your bio and introduce you, I want to speak to you directly. Because you hold a special place in the collective heart here at Reedwood. You really do. That's why I asked you to come, not just to visit, but to speak and to share. And you hold that special place in our hearts because you arrived at a time, some 9 years ago, around that time, when things were not easy. You showed up when it was hard. You didn't show up because it was the easy thing to do. And, well, it's something that I can just coast through. I'll show up then. You showed up when it was difficult. That's when you came to Reedwood. You chose to arrive. You chose to serve, to befriend, and to do that thing that you do, lead. You led here at Reedwood at a time when the meeting's life was uncertain, challenging, and in need of rest, reflection, healing, and discernment in the way forward. Thank you, dear friend. Our doors are ever open to your presence. Now, we did have a bouquet of flowers to give you, and they're being held by the person sitting in front of you right now. Dwight? As a gesture. Flowers and our love to you. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our friend Margaret Fraser, who served as interim pastor here at Reedwood from 2018 to 2019. In her early working life was in the academic world. She left her position as a senior lecturer, associate professor, and management at the University of Brighton, just south of England, to become a full-time student at Earlham School of Religion, where she was awarded a Master's of Divinity. That led her to serving as Dean of Pendle Hill, the Quaker Study and Retreat Center near Philadelphia, and then as Executive Secretary of Friends World Committee for Consultation Sections of the Americas. She trained with the Interim Ministry Network as an international interim minister and served in that capacity first at West Richmond Friends and then here at Reedwood Friends. 4 years ago, she moved to Belfast, Northern Ireland. She returns to the U.S. each year to stay close to her family, which includes a daughter here in Portland, and a daughter and son-in-law, and 3 granddaughters in Michigan. Margaret, welcome back to be among friends, both old and new, here at Reedwood. Please come. I'm going to give you a side hug.
Thank you.
Yes. Welcome.
People in Belfast are quite inquisitive, and as soon as I open my mouth, they know that I'm not from there. And we get into conversations very quickly, and the question usually is, well, what brought you here? And I usually fudge that because saying God makes them sort of jump back and get scared. But as people of faith, we understand leadings. I understand it that way, even though I can't yet say why. Why Belfast? It takes a lot to leave children and grandchildren and to move across an ocean with just a suitcase. But it also feels right. After all, I did it in reverse in 1993, when I left a tenured position in England with 2 middle schoolers and a suitcase to become a full-time student at Earlham School of Religion. I didn't know what was ahead, but I knew I absolutely had to do it. So let's jump in. This complicated situation in Ireland. The history of Irish and British relationships, is it complicated or is it simple? I'm going to keep it simple. So I'm cutting out the Vikings and the Norman French invaders, because even though they intended to pillage and conquer Ireland, most of them ended up falling in love with Irish women, and they integrated pretty quickly. And I'm also cutting out Quakers and Jews and Hindus and Muslims and the other quiet immigrants. So that's really winnowing down. And I'm just going to focus on 3 major people groups. Because at its heart, tensions over the last 400 years or so have really been between these groups. Access to land, wealth, and political power, or lack of it. Religion has been like a flag, a symbol, but not the cause of the conflict. So these 3 groups, well, first of all, the local Irish, who by this time had intermarried with Vikings and Normans and so on. The Irish had a very distinctive language and legal system, and different clans, different kings, different chieftains. Their affiliation was to the Catholic Church. But if I'm trying to describe, I try not to use that term, partly because so few people go to church these days. So I would refer to them as nationalists, Irish nationalists. And then secondly, the English colonizers, beginning in the 1500s. This got particularly marked in the time of Henry VIII and then Oliver Cromwell, who was particularly nasty. And this colonization was marked by accidents that are familiar all over the world when a large power colonizes others. So moving local people to the least productive land and reserving the best farming land for settlers. Extraction of raw materials. Not such a noticeable thing in Ireland because there weren't a lot, but the main thing was food. And food was grown in Ireland and exported to England. And this was a particular outrage during the famine, where perfectly good food was being shipped across the Irish Sea. And penal laws, persecuting the local religion. In Ireland's case, obviously, the Catholic Church. Bishops were killed. I mean, you could be killed for being a bishop. Church services and church education were outlawed. Still happened, but in secret, outdoors. The colonizers were associated with the Church of England, the Episcopal Church. In Ireland, it's called the Church of Ireland. And then the third group. Well, the English colonizers were both outnumbered and, not surprisingly, unpopular. So the authorities brought in a third group as a buffer. So non-Catholics from the north of England and southern Scotland were encouraged to move to Ireland. They were offered good farming land because the Irish had been moved westwards, in return for being the day-to-day face of the colonial authorities. They were predominantly Church of Scotland, Presbyterian. They were unionist, wanting to keep the union of Ireland and Britain, but they were very different from the English colonizer unionists in wealth and social status. The Ulster Scots, as we call them here, in the US, the people who moved from there to Appalachia are referred to as Scots-Irish or Scotch-Irish. It's the same community. Anyway, the Ulster Scots were told by the colonizers that they were superior to the native Irish. And they did have privileges over them. But they were still discriminated against by the colonizers in the early days. No access to university. And as they weren't Church of Ireland, they were thus locked out of the professions, just like the Quakers and the Catholics were. So both the... Are you with me so far, or is it already getting complicated? So the colonizers and the settlers who were the buffer group were both in a minority. So it wasn't a comfortable situation for them, but they made it work. So let's fast forward to the 20th century, when the Irish struggle against colonization really took force and was effective, and the reaction against it. So the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, and its splinter groups were the militant freedom fighters for Irish independence. And about the same time, some members of the former British Army regiments morphed into Protestant paramilitary groups as the armed resistance against Irish independence. This was a very violent and rocky situation. So in 1921, there was a compromise. The 6 counties in the northeast with a Protestant majority were carved out of the new Irish Free State and formed into Northern Ireland, part of the United Kingdom, a statelet, and Belfast became its capital. It was strongly Protestant, strongly unionist, and the Catholic people in Northern Ireland were discriminated against in many ways. And because the they were in a minority in this little statelet, there wasn't much they could do about it. So jumping forward again, the Troubles is the name given to civil unrest between 1968 and 1998 in Northern Ireland. Catholics, nationalists, were inspired by the civil rights movement in the USA. They chose the same practices and tactics that the civil rights movement here carried out, and protested the continuing discrimination in lack of access to apprenticeships, because these were all, you know, if you were a young man, you got your apprenticeship from your dad or your uncle or your grandpa, so the apprenticeships were completely tied up in the Protestant community, and the laboring jobs went to Catholics. So it was not just apprenticeships, it was occupations, subsidized housing, and political representation at the local level. So their peaceful protests, their civil rights protests, were met with violence by the British Army that had come to keep the peace, but were clearly sympathetic to the Unionist majority there, and hastily reformed Protestant paramilitary groups that had sort of died down a little bit after Northern Ireland was set up. And then after that, there followed these years of heartbreaking ritual tit-for-tat murders. You know, if a busload of people from one community were forced to get out and be gunned down, then a reprisal would happen soon after. The 1998 peace agreements were huge. They removed formal discrimination against Catholics and provided for a measure of affirmative action. So, for instance, the police force, which had been previously solidly Protestant Unionist, was intended to recruit on the basis of a 50-50. They've never got there, but that's the aspiration. And the peace agreements also acknowledged that once there was a majority in the north in favour of the reunification of Ireland, that would happen. So we're nearly there. There are only 2 counties now that have a majority Protestant population. Things have changed really fast. So 30 years on from the peace agreements, many Protestants believe they've lost everything because they've lost privilege. They haven't really lost, but, you know. Demographic change has come faster than anyone anticipated, and the loss of manufacturing jobs has exacerbated their plight. So they hunker down in blue-collar neighborhoods, many of which are controlled by paramilitary groups, and those groups operate loan sharking, protection rackets, and drug dealing. So when I'm asked, why are you here? I'm not sure. God will tell me sometime. Young children are groomed to serve these gangs as messengers. So violence is just being passed on through generations. We're at least 3 generations from the Troubles. And the stories of Grandpa in the glory days of how many people he killed, you know, they just go down. Well, soon after I arrived in Belfast, I read about Brian and Linda Irvine, who are residents of a Protestant neighbourhood in East Belfast, where paramilitaries flourish. Linda got it into her head that she wanted to learn Irish. It was her language too, she reckoned. Sadly, the Irish language has become very politicized in the last 100 years. So among some in the Protestant community, it's symbolic of nationalism, just like an Irish flag would be. There were no opportunities to learn Irish anywhere near their home, so Linda took herself off to a community centre in a different part of town. Her husband, Brian, was active in the leadership of a Protestant political party. In fact, after his brother died unexpectedly, he succeeded him as the leader of this party for a while. So can you imagine the pillow talk? You want to do what, love? Then Linda decided that East Belfast needed an opportunity to learn Irish. So she set up a non-profit called Turas, which is Irish for journey. And I thought, these are my people. People who do unexpected things, countercultural things. They create cognitive dissonance. They make change happen. So I went to the Turas website and clicked on a button to volunteer and saw they needed someone to pour tea during the class breaks. I thought, I can do that. I know how to pour tea. So it meant, I started in the January, and it meant taking a bus and then having quite a long walk through this neighborhood dominated by the paramilitaries. I was absolutely terrified. There are murals with these frightening images of masked gunmen. But I just decided the only thing to do was hold my head up, make eye contact with people. And then it occurred to me that actually the people I passed looked very much like my Glasgow aunties and uncles. And they were just trying to survive living in this challenging area. So that took away my fear. I just thought of everybody as an auntie or uncle. And Brian, well, he became one of Linda's strongest supporters, and he actually joined the Irish classes. Linda went on to found an Irish language preschool in East Belfast. Her opponents claimed there was no interest in such an enterprise in that part of the world, but the parents of the children who went there proved them wrong. And Brian and I pour tea and coffee every week. So I get to know him pretty well. I tease him a lot. And that inevitably got me to learn more about his kid brother, David, who'd been the leader of this party. He died way too young, in his 50s. Unlike the rest of his family, David had joined the paramilitary Ulster Volunteer Force. He'd been arrested in Belfast during the Troubles for driving a stolen car with bomb-making materials, and he was sentenced to 11 years. In the Maze prison, he came under the mentorship of Gusty Spence, who was a former British soldier who was serving a life sentence for a number of sectarian murders. But Gusty had had a transformational experience and realized that violence was not the answer. And he saw a spark of something in David, and he mentored him, and David too had a change of heart. The peace agreements included the release of most of the paramilitary prisoners, including David and Gusty. And their political party was instrumental in bringing some of the Ulster Scots to the negotiating table. We're all flawed, and several things can be true at the same time. So simple and complicated aren't really opposites. It's like that. People of violence can become peacemakers. And peacemakers can be flawed too. I'm devastated to learn that Senator George Mitchell, who was one of the most gifted and committed contributors to the Belfast peace agreements, is in the Epstein files. He now regrets his association with Epstein. And in my dismay, I just tell myself that we're all mixed bags. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And I'm going to end with words from two people who I find inspirational. One of them, Mark and I didn't mention this, but one of them is John O'Donoghue, of course. Anyway, Sidney Bailey, who was head of the Quaker United Nations office in New York in the 1950s, wrote, "Reconciliation in the biblical sense is not about ideologies or beliefs, but about people, their relationship and response to God, and their relationship and response to each other." As I would tell myself, look people in the eye and greet them. And I'm going to end with the Irish mystic, John O'Donoghue. A threshold is not simply a boundary, but it's a frontier that cannot be crossed without the heart being passionately engaged and woken up. At this threshold, a great complexity of emotions comes alive. Confusion, fear, excitement, sadness, hope. And he also wrote, "At any time, you can ask yourself, at which threshold am I now standing? At this time in my life, what am I leaving and what am I about to enter?"
Thank you so much, Margaret, for that message and that challenge as a query about thresholds. What are we passing out of, and what are we passing into at this time? Perhaps personally, perhaps as a meeting, and we know very much so socially that applies. The word, as the song said, the world is about to turn, and in order for us to do that, we have to pass through into something new. I wonder if we could center down, take a moment for silence to consider this small, still, inward voice. If you feel so moved to share out of the silence, Suzanne has a microphone. Friends online, if you feel so moved to share out of the silence, make sure you're unmuted. But let us be still and attend to that inward teacher who is Christ.